our second episode of Secrets of Practice. Today our special guest is Nathan Chan. Nathan is the assistant principal cellist of the Seattle Symphony, and I'm also excited to do this interview because I follow him on Instagram. You can find him at Nathan Chan Cello and on his website nathanchan.com. Nathan, how are you?
I'm doing very well, Claire. Thank you so much for thinking of me for this wonderful project, and I hope the information that I can share with all your readers and listeners is helpful to everybody on their own practice journeys, because I know it's a difficult and complicated path indeed.
For our first question, I want to know, do you have a certain practice mindset that you have every time you practice? How do you approach practicing?
Well, practicing for me has been a very interesting relationship, because I would say growing up when I was playing the cello, practicing did not come very easily to me. It was something I didn't enjoy doing. It was something I sort of resisted doing. And I think I relied a little bit too much on, talent or whatever you want to call it to kind of get me through a lot of problems. For a certain part of my life, that worked okay. The big thing that really transformed me is to stop practicing like I was performing. Before, I used to sort of practice as if I was performing, and while that was fun, it didn't really get the job done in terms of making sure I was really at the best level I could be in a aspect or venue. Because we all know when the performance hits, there's all these sorts of external factors that come into play that we don't expect when we're in the practice room. And so really learning how to separate those two minds so that when there are additional challenges, you're prepared for them was a really key aspect for me in terms of the way I started to think about practice.
Yeah, that's wonderful. And I'm curious, I know all of us sort of go through that same thing where we can perform a lot in the practice room, especially at one time. Was there a certain, when you made that switch from realizing the two separate aspects of practicing and performing and preparing for the performance, was there certain practical things that you started implementing when you were practicing?
Certainly. Definitely the most important thing that I started doing very diligently and made sure was part of my discipline routine was scales, thirds, and sixths.
Yeah.
Sort of really making sure my left hand was in a place where that you don't have to think about it anymore when you're performing about it, especially in terms of intonation and accuracy. Before, whenever there was anything that was sort of stressful, because I wasn't prepared enough in my left hand, that would really hamper certain sections of my playing. But because every day I do scales and thirds and sixths and things like that, my hand is in a way where I can think less about the accuracy of the finger and more about the music. And that is such a freeing feeling.
Yeah, that's wonderful. I know my teacher and I do a lot of thirds and sixths, and
Yes, it's amazing, isn't it? It just sort of locks everything in to a very solid place.
Yeah, and I'm interested, like, sort of for a more how you think about the left hand. Is there certain like keywords? I don't know if that's a weird question, but keywords you remind yourself in terms of like relaxation or like placement or anything like that? Just characteristics of the left hand?
Well, thankfully I feel like my natural tendency isn't to overpress on the left hand, so I haven't had to really struggle a lot with hypertension, but definitely being relaxed in the whole arm and thinking about the weight of my shoulders and my back and using gravity to really anchor myself has been a really important thing. And there are certain exercises that I do where I will release certain fingers when for example, if I'm playing a fourth finger, I will sort of tap my other fingers like this to make sure I'm not grabbing onto the string. So that's sort of the technical view of it. Now that I'm more comfortable with that perspective, I think a lot more in terms of making sure the way I'm placing my left hand on the fingerboard is producing the best possibility for overtones on the cello. So now I'm thinking less about it tension-wise, and now I'm thinking about it more in terms of beauty of sound, which is nice.
Yeah, that's wonderful. We often don't think about left hand as being associated with sound. So that's a really important thing to keep in mind. For our next question, do you have a certain practice routine that you follow every day?
Apart from doing exercises at the start of every practice, I find that it's most helpful to address certain aspects of a piece, targeting specific spots and addressing the techniques that are necessary to improve those spots. So I wouldn't say I'd necessarily have a routine, but the routine for me is solving problems. I think that's a big thing that folks should really think about more in the practice room. One of my least favorite questions is, how long do you practice? Because I think it's such a useless question, because you can be practicing for 6 hours, say, like the most terrible practice where you're not accomplishing anything, you're not solving anything, things aren't getting better, and you're just maybe relying on repetition. And I so dislike that. And there have been times where I've been in the practice room for just 30 minutes and I've been so focused and I did exactly what I needed to do to improve a certain spot, and I think that's a much more productive type of practicing.
Yeah, I really like that because it makes practicing task-based, and I like to think of it as, if you have a checklist for each day and you check off the boxes, that's what you can do with practicing and feel so much more productive instead of just staring at a clock.
Yes, exactly. You get it.
And I also really liked how you said you break down your pieces into different techniques to work on. For me, that makes it a lot more able to practice and conquerable instead of it's all abstract. When you're problem solving, are there certain steps you take to solve each problem? What happens when you get stuck and you're not sure how to solve a certain problem?
Recognizing when you're feeling stuck is a frustrating feeling. But I think the most important part is knowing that you have the tools in which to break a problem into its fundamental components. So I think a lot about, let's say, if I'm playing a fast run and it's just not clean and it's just sounding messy, slowing things down is extremely important. When you slow things down, you give your brain more time to self-analyze and really use your ear to the best of its ability. Well, the first thing I'm asking is, what's going wrong and why? Why is the most important part. So if I notice my left hand and right are out of sync, then I have a couple of strategies and techniques in which for example, I do up bow and down bow staccato, because I know that will sort of sync things up between my left and right hand. So for rhythm, that's very important. If I have intonation problems, of course I'll bring out the tuner. I like to put in an AirPod, I'll put on a drone, and I'll make sure that the whole run feels in tune with the drone tone. Things, if I feel my shifts are not so good, I will break things down into making sure I'm shifting on the right fingers and put sort of doing things in the right order in my brain. It's all sort of little things like that I've been taught, thankfully, and I have to give a huge credit to my teacher, Richard Aaron, who really gave me the tools necessary, all these little tricks and things to address the why are things going wrong.
Yeah, that's wonderful. And one thing you said about slowing down practice, I find that even though I don't like slow practice sometimes, it really allows me to observe what's actually happening. So that's great. Was there a certain point in your cello journey that you realized, I have to make my practicing more problem solving based and more task based?
I was in college. I did the combined program between Columbia and Juilliard. So I had a full academic course schedule, and I was trying to improve my cello playing at the same time. And the simple fact was there weren't enough hours of the day to really dedicate as much time as I would have liked to cello. So with the small amount of time I did have, I had to become very efficient with my practice. That sort of became the catalyst for this change. When I only had, say, an hour from 12 to 1 a.m. After doing a bunch of coursework,
Right.
I had to be really focused and go into the room with a game plan, if you will. I only have this hour. I don't really have a bunch of time to discover a bunch of problems, but I have to think about the last time I practiced, what did I feel I had a lot of trouble with? And let's just jump right in and try and focus on that aspect of my playing for that amount of time. And I feel that knowing that I could do and get good work done in a limited amount of time changed the way I practiced, say, when I had 3 or 4 hours, because then knowing that I had that efficiency in an hour taught me a lot more about, when you had more freedom of time. So that's sort of my relationship with that.
That's so crazy, thinking you only had from 12 a.m. to 1 a.m. to practice.
That was the only time.
Yeah. When you have more time, how do you practice differently than when you don't have as much time and you're more efficient about problem solving? Because I find that there's sort of this balance between allowing yourself to observe and having more freedom with your time, but then also being productive, which having less time allows. So what does your practice look like when you have more time?
I think when I have more time, I sort of investigate the relationship of the performing aspect that I was talking about, the separation. After addressing problems more, I allow myself to quote unquote perform the piece a little bit to myself and see how that changes the way I feel. And usually that reveals a lot of interesting issues and topics, like, when I'm performing and I'm, trying to be as, communicate as much as I can, I notice I'm getting more tense here. I guess you allow yourself the randomness of external effects on your performing when you have more time. It can help inform what you need to solve next. And also, maybe from a more technical point of view, I will work slower longer.